After I did the first episode of SCPs as Dragons a couple weeks ago, I realized it had actually been quite a while since I watched some SCP stuff myself. So I popped over to my personal favorite SCP channel, SCP Explained, and caught up on a bunch of their videos, which, by the way, I've hijacked some of their art for my thumbnail again. I'll link them in the description, check them out if you like SCP animated stuff, their videos are really fun. But watching those videos and going through the comment section from the last SCP Dragons video got me super amped up to jump right into a second episode of SCP Dragons because you all gave me a lot of good ideas for what ones I could use for round 2. So let's get into it, shall we? Let's go. Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show. Walking the near-endless dungeons of the Slayers of Cursed Predators Arctic Fortress felt as though it could have been an infinite venture. My guide, Sir Jackson Bright, jaunted along and revealed the origins of countless creatures and entities with a jovial tone as though he were introducing me to his friends. The way he spoke seemed to imply that he was like reigning royalty to the Slayers, though from the few interactions I had with other members of this strange collective, I did learn that there was quite an extensive list of things Sir Bright was not permitted to do on castle grounds. One of these things was to take samples off a creature they referred to as the Hateful Flesh Fiend. It was a creature that once more made me question why this group referred to themselves as the Slayers of Cursed Predators, when they clearly kept so many monstrosities, such as this one, alive to study. This dragon was a convulsing mass of flesh that had shifting yellow eyes appearing across its body, bizarrely placed protruding limbs, and even extra mouths at random points of its hide. Though Sir Bright informed me that this creature's appearance had shifted many times since first being captured. This dragon had first appeared in Siberia nearly 600 years ago, where it killed dozens of people and fields full of livestock in a small farming village. Unfortunately, the extent of its terror hadn't ceased with killing at its own mangled claws. Anything slain, or even just wounded by this beast, would soon after reawaken as soulless slaves to the dragon, their bodies shifting and warping into fleshy masses, much like the beast itself. They'd then hunt for their master, killing any around them, even their own loved ones, regardless of the relations they may have had while they still lived. Eventually, many slaves of the Hateful Fiend would find their way back to it and merge their bodies with the beast, helping it grow larger and stronger. Luckily, the Slayers of Cursed Predators stepped in before this creature could spread its curse beyond this Siberian town. They brought their own dragon mounts to burn away any infected, as they quickly found that fire was the most effective weapon against the spread. They essentially wiped that poor town off the face of the earth to ensure they'd gotten all of the dragon's infected spawn. Then, they captured the beast itself. When I asked the inevitable question why they hadn't killed this monster yet, Sir Bright claimed that they kept it as one of many failsafes against more dangerous beasts. If they found some new dragon with unknown weaknesses, they could simply infect it with a sample of the Hateful Flesh Fiend, have it turn into a minion of the beast, then kill it with fire. Sir Bright himself had attempted this technique on a quest before, though, and had caused some undesirable results that he seemed to be ducking around fully explaining to me. The reasoning behind letting the beast live did seem reasonable enough, but to me it's still far from justified letting the creature live, seeing as how, with enough time, if it did ever get free again, it could essentially reduce our world to a sprawl of soulless slaves to this beast. Partway through my tour, my hand instinctively shot to the blade at my side as a pair of small yellow and orange dragons flew down the halls towards us. I immediately looked to Sir Bright, and upon seeing my battle-prepped stance, he yelled, "Oh no, they're free!" He told me to stay back, that these were some of the most dangerous beasts the Slayers had ever come across, and only he could stop them. I did as instructed, but still drew my blade and waited with my heart pounding as the pair got closer and closer. Sir Bright moved towards them, still not drawing a weapon. The orange dragon got within inches of Sir Bright and he leapt at it with a cry, then landed on the creature and rode it down the hallway, yelling, "Wee!" He soon after leapt off and pet both the orange and yellow dragons as my pulse slowly settled back to normal. He laughed all too joyfully at my terror and claimed that these creatures were far from a threat. He'd of course shown me some dragon allies the Slayers had, so I should have suspected that these somewhat cute creatures were far from the danger I'd assumed, though obviously Sir Bright's antics hadn't helped. He claimed these creatures were the Ivern, though that was somewhat of a misnomer, as these two Cyclops dragons would not be classified as wyverns, seeing as how they had wings and no other limbs save for their tails. More accurately, they'd be amphitheres, though I suppose it's harder to play off that moniker with the word eye. The two unblinking monocular dragons were very friendly, and I even took a moment to pet one myself, which it seemed to enjoy, letting out a light purring noise, though I had no idea where the sound was coming from, as the creatures had no mouth or nose. Sir Bright informed me that these two were more so like pets to the Slayers than they were field assets, but they had proven themselves useful when certain creatures had broken free from containment. As he'd shown me earlier that day, they had in containment a creature called the Sculpted Skull Splitter that would only remain immobile if someone was constantly watching it, and as such they kept 3 guards constantly placed by its cage. But there had been a time when they only kept 2 on guard. A few decades ago, even with 2 beings standing watch, there was a coincidental moment when they both blinked at the exact same time, and that was enough for the impossibly fast creature to smash through its cage and bite off the head of one guard. The second guard may have opened their eyes fast enough to freeze the creature for a few more moments, but inevitably they would have to blink, and the creature ended up killing them as well. The dragon then rampaged through the halls, killing dozens of people, and was so fast that it was near impossible for the infantries hunting after it to find and catch. But thankfully, the Iverns were there to help. When one infantry finally caught up to the creature, it was perfectly still, being stared at by the 2 cycloptic dragons. These creatures don't quite have human levels of intelligence, but on that day they seemed to fully understand what needed to be done to keep the Skull Splitter from harming anyone else, and they stared the creature down right up until the Slayers had returned it to its cage and reinforced its cell. The Iverns had always been a pleasant addition to the castle grounds, but since that fateful day they'd also been regarded as heroes, and any who came across their path in the ominous dungeons of the fortress gained a brief sense of calm from regarding these helpful creatures. After being told about countless monstrosities by Sir Bright, a thought inevitably crossed my mind. What was the most dangerous creature the Slayers had ever faced? Sir Bright then slapped a hand off his forehead and claimed he couldn't believe he hadn't yet shown me the unkillable dragon. We sped through the halls, descended down many flights of stairs, before coming to a dark room with only one massive cage. Behind the first set of bars was another, then another, and within was a beast bound in so many chains I could barely make out its form. Its maw was trapped shut, but its heavy, rumbling breath, paired with the foul stench of rotting flesh, chilled me to my core. Sir Bright taunted the creature, asking it if it was having a pleasant eternity. It replied with a guttural growl that quaked through its snout and shook the room. It had clearly understood him. Sir Bright then informed me that this was the unkillable dragon, a creature that had been one of the very first the Slayers of Cursed Predators had ever hunted, even before they began caging and studying dragons, and that this one had essentially driven them to do so. The dragon was originally smaller in size, and a simple band of 4 Slayers had found it, fought it, and slain it. Or so they thought. They'd stabbed a blade straight through its head, only to find that not an hour later, it reawoke and its head had grown an external skull. When they tried to stab it again, their blades cracked off its altered head. They then stabbed through the top of its neck, only for bony plates to grow from there soon after. They cut the wings off its back to keep it from fleeing, and it sprouted new wings from its forearms. Anything they tried to do to kill or wound the beast just resulted in it rapidly adapting. The creature managed to kill many troops of knights sent after it before the Slayers finally deemed it necessary to cage the beast and tried dozens of tactics in rapid succession until they could finally slay it. They tried burning it, freezing it, having it struck by lightning, cursing it, tearing its limbs apart, and every single attempt only made the creature stronger and stronger. But after their first months of trials, they became fed up and did something truly awful. Not yet fully understanding just how unkillable this dragon was, they boarded it onto a ship and sailed it to Japan, where they then placed it, bound in chains, in the territory of a fully grown, monolithic shin god. I understood the impulse, as these are quite possibly the most lethal species of dragons native to my world, but that battle would only serve to make the already unkillable dragon into a near all-powerful monstrosity. The Shin God quickly found and nearly eviscerated the bound dragon with its incredibly powerful and destructive purple flame breath, but of course soon after, the dragon's body reformed, larger and sturdier, with its chains now destroyed from the prior blast. It attempted to fight back and shockingly managed to bite through the Shin God's hide, but that only caused the creature to spew its toxic blood onto the unkillable dragon. Shin God blood is lethal and acidic, and upon contact, the unkillable dragon's body began to bubble, and its dark green flesh melted around it. But, as you may have expected, this didn't kill it. The battle raged on and on, with every blow from the Shin God only making the beast more and more powerful, until the unkillable dragon managed to snap the neck of Japan's most vicious predator. The unkillable dragon thereafter went on a rampage, killing other Shin Gods, mighty Ultra Beasts, smogging Heaterans, really any living thing it came across, but specifically looking for powerful dragons, seemingly knowing that fighting them would allow it to grow more and more resilient and mighty itself. It took every resource, knight, and draconic ally at the Slayer's disposal to finally get the creature back in a cage. Since then, other attempts have been made to kill it, but to this day, nothing has worked, and seemingly nothing ever will. So regardless of whether the Slayers ever kill the dragons they have contained above, their Arctic fortress will always be necessary to house the heinous, monstrous, unkillable beast. It had admittedly surprised me that the Knights had been able to recontain the unkillable dragon after it had become so apparently powerful, and that led me to asking Sir Bright if there were any creatures they'd come across that they'd been unable to capture. He claimed that in some cases they left a dragon or entity out in the wild, but managed to keep it regulated to a certain uninhabited land or island. An example he first mentioned was the island of the Phasbian Kingdom, a land cursed by its cruel king Willis Aftirian that I'd only recently dealt with myself. Them having known about that island made me that much more uncomfortable with the Knight's operation, as if I'd managed to end that whole ordeal with minimal aid, why had the Slayers not done so decades before? My skepticism of this organization continued to grow as he led me from the compound back to our dragon mounts to fly me over a farther region of the Arctic. Eventually we came to a place that was littered with random pillars and statues. There were even some completely out of place tropical trees, somehow growing in the midst of the snowy tundra. Eventually, mixed in with the bizarre blend of objects, I saw an elegant green, deer-like dragon. It had a glowing ring behind a cascade of antlers and hovering ice shards. It trotted peacefully in the snowy landscape and looked to me to be totally free, but Sir Bright informed me this was not so. This creature had come to our world from beyond the stars decades ago. It wasn't inherently cruel like some of the other dragons they'd hunted, but it was far too powerful to be left unchecked. He called it the Verdant Elderbuck, and it had the ability to fire a beam from its antlers that could convert objects into completely different materials. It could turn ice to stone, flames to water, even human beings into pillars of marble. It would only attack if threatened, but its aim was far from perfect, and when it went to arms against another dragon or beast, there could be significant collateral damage. This was why the Slayers had led it here, to a barren landscape where it couldn't harm any other creatures, save for a few beasts that made the deep Arctic their home. He seemed to anticipate my next coming question and told me that they were able to keep it from leaving this region through a series of rituals regularly enacted by members of the Slayers. These rituals involved bards playing music for the creature, performances such as plays being enacted for its entertainment, and so on. Sir Bright seemed to keep the explanation and extent of the rituals vague, and that made me all the more concerned about what else they may be doing to keep this creature sated. But before I could press for more, he brought me back to the fortress and I was once more distracted by even more fearful beasts that they had locked away. As I always do with my Dragon episodes, I've put all 4 of these drawings up on my Teespring store as posters. You can find them linked in the description, or the pinned comment, or the little bar somewhere below this video. And man, do I really feel like I crushed it with this second round. I mean, I think between my 2 SCP Dragon videos, the aquatic horror from the first episode might still be my favorite one I've done, but it's a tough call, and overall I think this second episode was a step up. But of course, if you're new to the channel and you haven't seen round 1 of SCP Dragons, you can go back and check that out. Or maybe my SCP Superheroes videos, or Pokemon as SCPs. I got tons of different SCP stuff. I'll link the whole playlist at the end. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note. And the thought I want to leave people with today is just the simple idea that you don't have to attend to every argument you're invited to. Some disagreements just aren't necessarily worth your energy. Even if someone is really trying to get you to partake in an argument, sometimes you just have to set a boundary, step away, and leave it as is. I hope that's helpful to someone out there. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Friday. Goodbye.